Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Superman and Lois, Season 2, Episode 3. It's called The Thing in the Mines. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. So, that's the first thing we have to talk about with this episode, is the swerve. And it's an interesting swerve because it's a swerve that's aimed at more the fans who are in the know. It's for people like me. It's the nerds. It's the ones who know Superman enough, right? The ones who know enough about Superman, all of the signs that this was going to be a doomsday story. It was to sort of give us a like, oh no, tricked you. It's actually something else. That's interesting to me because your average casual audience might not get it as much, but maybe I think there's evidence to suggest that with some of these nerdier shows and superhero ideas is that the casual audience like to find out about these things, and maybe they'll get more interested because they see the reactions of people like me who felt like they knew where it was going, or at least the type of story we're playing with, and then it turns out to be something else. In fact, this episode, Lois even dropped the word doomsday. She went, "Don't go all doomsday on me, Clark. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge." And it was one of those things where he comes out of the mountain, out of the mines near the end, and he's in the suit, and it's very reminiscent of Doomsday because he's got a suit on. Now, admittedly, he's not as big as I would, think of Doomsday being. Doomsday is more of a Hulk size, but at the very least, it's like, okay, so he's smaller because it's TV, right? They're making it so it's a guy in a makeup and suit or whatever, rather than a big CG monster. You can respect that if that's what they're doing. But there is kind of a build up to revealing the face and ripping off part of the mask, so it was kind of it started to feel like we were about to be swerved. So then when it actually happens and you kind of see it looks like Superman, but he's kind of pale and he's got these lines on his face, and you're like, shit, is this a Bizarro story? And sure enough, they use the word bizarre Superman in a conversation, in a scene, but the ending clicks it all together, where we see him land on what used to be the fortress seemingly. And he has got the backwards S like Bizarro. He's got the tattered cape, and nice little touches at the ending when the logo comes up for the ending. It was flipped. Even the title, Superman and Lois, was flipped. So we're going to play with Bizarro this season, which is kind of fun. I'll be curious to see. I think we hear him say something briefly at the end. He says one word, but it'd be very curious to see how they handle the speaking backwards, and how much they play with that, and how sympathetic Bizarro might get, because in the past he has been. Certainly this idea that Bizarro has a link to Superman that's affecting his mind and he's having these weird moments. No, I've never read a story, I don't think, with Bizarro doing that to Superman, but it makes more sense, I think, with a Bizarro story than a Doomsday story. The idea that this is a mirror image of Clark, so that they have maybe some link in this version of their story that is affecting Superman. That makes some sense, I think, if that's what they're doing. So, yeah, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at the swerve. It made me smile. I got a nice little chuckle that they basically teased as the story that everyone, at least people who follow Superman and have seen a version of Doomsday in Smallville of all things, they've seen a version of Doomsday in the Zack Snyder movies. Neither of which are good examples of Doomsday. There's been 2 animated adaptations of Death of Superman, the latter of which was actually quite good. The one that's actually just called Death of Superman is actually surprisingly great little movie. But they swerved us into it being a Bizarro story, and it's not something that we get to do as much. Now, of course, the other Superman TV shows in the past have had Bizarro episodes of some kind, where they've done their version of Bizarro. Sometimes it's a bit more muted and it's just kind of like a slightly off version of Clark. Some it's a bit more faithful, where he's actually more the reverse and all the rest of it. So be curious to see what they're doing here, but at the very least they seem to have the suit, it's a bit darker, the S is backwards, the cape is tattered, he's got a sort of grey cracked face. All these things make some sense. All feels authentic enough so far, so I'll be curious to see what they do with it. As for the rest of the episode, how do I feel? Because I haven't been I wasn't super hot in the first episode. Second one was a little bit better, but still had a lot of the same problems. This one, I guess it's kind of similar to last episode. There's some things I like, there's some things I don't like. there's some things I'm happier over. Jordan and Sarah's like drama about this kiss is brought to a resolution by the end of the episode. And this was probably the strongest of the 3 episodes for their story, actually, because it did at least bring in some interesting points. I like, don't get me wrong, part of me is still looking at the 3 episodes as a whole, and I'm saying, what did this plot actually give us? Like, what was the net gain for the story of these characters? I guess maybe the net gain is the one thing I liked, because the thing I'm about to say that I liked about this story, this episode, was the idea that Jordan wants to tell her about his powers because he feels like it's a barrier, and maybe this idea of him finding out a secret sort of makes him thinking about his secret, something that Natalie points out even, and this conversation that comes up, I do quite like. I do think Jordan does come off, like, even for a teenager, he's pretty naive in this, because he starts yelling that he wants to marry Sarah. He starts yelling that he wants to marry Sarah. I'm a little bit sick, so if my voice is slipping a little bit here or there, forgive me. But he wants to marry Sarah and he wants to tell her his secret, and Clark's like, no, don't be a fool. What Clark should really probably say is that, look, until you're 18, this is not your choice. Once you hit that point, ultimately I can't stop you, which is really the right response in some ways. Not that he should be that cold about it. Like, there's more, diplomatic ways of talking about it, of sort of trying to get across the reasons why he shouldn't just come out with this, which is something that kind of comes up later in the episode. But the parts of this that I actually did really like was, one, Jordan's desire to do so, even if it is maybe a mistake for him to at this point. It makes a lot of sense. I actually really like when Clark says to Jordan, I know what it's like to keep the secret from someone you care about, and like the guilt that you feel because of that. And Jordan says, yeah, you do, but you don't know what it's like to be on the other end. Because I was one who was lied to for most of my life until I found out who my parents were. And I actually really liked him bringing that up. That was like a really good bit of writing, because it is true. Jordan has a very unique perspective on this, because he was on the receiving end of the secret, but now he's the one who's having to keep the secret. So he actually has both sides of this viewpoint. Which means that one day he might actually be a better authority on talking about this and giving advice on this than Clark ever would have been, because Clark never got to experience that other side of it. I really like that part of it, honestly. So, and I like the boys bonding with Natalie a little bit over video games, and they've almost got a bit more of a brother-sister thing going at this point. Maybe they'll do a thing with Jonathan and Natalie, like, romantically. I don't know. I don't know. They bond a little bit. It may not be going that way. I'd rather it didn't. It wouldn't be the worst thing if it did, but at least right now it feels more siblings, and that's cool. That works. So that's good. The actual resolution and Sarah bringing it up to her mother, those scenes were just kind of whatever. They're just kind of their typical TV scenes of, like, if he doesn't forgive you, then he doesn't deserve you. You could copy and paste the dialogue from anything basically for those scenes. And I don't really feel much for them or the resolution. I'm just kind of glad it's over. The one interesting thing to come out of it is the debate of, well, if he is going to be with someone, he has to ultimately accept that one day he may have to tell them who he is, and how does he want her to feel about the fact that he has powers. And to be fair, Clark does ultimately, when he calms down, and it's not all his fault because he's been affected by the Bizarro stuff, but he does say, look, if you still feel equally strongly that you want to tell her in a year's time, we'll have this conversation again, and maybe it'll go a little bit different. And I think that's a smart thing to say. And it's not a promise that you can tell her in a year. It's more just that let's see if this feeling persists for a year. Because if it doesn't last a year, then Clark was just right, and he's dodged a bullet by not just blurting out his secret to people. That said, though, I will say this. Like, this is an old superhero trope, but this whole idea that if you, like, tell someone that they're dating a superhero or someone with powers, it puts them in danger, like, that always makes me roll my eyes, because 9 times out of 10 I would say they are safer knowing their context and situation, because then they'll act appropriately and know that, they live a riskier life, so they won't take, they wouldn't do certain things, they wouldn't risk certain things, knowing the situation they're in. Whereas oftentimes when you have like a Superman and Lois thing where Lois doesn't know she's with Superman, she ends up like putting herself in all these like situations, and like, you know, like, maybe that's a bad example because Lois would do that anyway, but I'm thinking of any other example of this. Maybe Smallville's the one to go back to, where it's like, you can't tell Lana about who you are, it'll put her in danger, and then Lana always was in danger anyway. At least if she knew who Clark was, she might be able to yell for help or use it to her advantage. You know, knowing what deck or what hand of cards she's been dealt and what hand she can play would be a useful tool, as opposed to hiding half the cards from her. I don't know. It's just one of those things where that argument is like, I am long done with hearing about it, and it just always comes off as just like a writing trope to me to justify why they don't. And it's not like there's not good reasons not to bring it up, because it's an earth-shattering thing to tell someone. It's a huge deal. It's like, you're very unique. It's a scary thing to tell someone. But ultimately, you know, there is a point where Clark won't have a say in this. Right now he does, because his son's like 15 or whatever, right? But in a few years' time, when his son's officially an adult and he's allowed to make his own choices, it doesn't matter that Clark's Superman. He doesn't have a say in shit when it comes to who Jordan tells about who he is. And that's something he'll have to accept. It's a debate that could be interesting to explore deeper in the future, so that's cool. Other stuff, I complained a lot last time about the Lucy plot, and I'm going to more or less complain about it again in this episode. They try to give it a bit more context by bringing Sam Lane back into it. He doesn't come back in specifically for that plot. He's there to help get John Henry in to sneak around the mines, but very quickly it becomes him and Lois arguing about Lucy, and he kind of just ignored the cult stuff. He didn't read Lois's article because he just didn't believe it was possible that his daughter was in a death cult or whatever. The biggest problem with this plotline is that it's been introduced entirely and continued up until the last scene of this episode. And I don't mean the last scene of the episode, but the last scene of this plotline in the episode, which is finally the cult leader lady shows up and says, "Lucy's not coming to see you. I came instead." Now that moment's easily the best moment of the entire plotline, because it's finally seeing something and seeing a character firsthand, and this idea that they can't get to Lucy, that she's actually off limits to Lois, and even to an extent Sam, that she's been held away by this cult leader. Like, that would justify maybe a little bit of the it's only just hearsay and only just like talking about what's going on, because the idea that you're trying to get to Lucy and you can't, like making the audience feel that because we keep talking about Lucy but not getting to see her because we're intentionally being withheld from her, that's not a bad idea. The problem is that every part of this has been like that. It's just been, oh yeah, the lady at the office, Chrissy, I learned her name, but only because I looked at what it was in IMDb, not because it stuck out in my memory. Like, she's listened to a podcast, and then she tells us again later in the same episode, "This is getting serious, Lois, this is all going on, let me give you some exposition." And in this episode, it's, you know, a lot of fighting between Sam and Lois, and it's meant to be this really emotional scene where Lois is like getting mad at Sam for, like, you know, being a shit dad again and not taking this Lucy thing seriously, and him being like miffed about it. And it was really hard to give a shit because all of this plotline has felt like it's just come out of nowhere. And even though this is the second episode we're talking about it, it doesn't change the fact that so far all of it is just sort of been thrust on us without anything to actually build into it or lead into it or make us feel anything for it. I mean, in the context of this show, unless, you know, like I know what Lucy looks like because they've got the same actress from Supergirl from a long time ago, but, you know, it's not that unreasonable that people watching this show haven't seen that. So Lucy right now is just a name. In fact, more to the point, like, I know Lois in the comics has a sister, so it's not weird for me to hear Lois has a sister. But I would be fascinated to know if anyone can remember, did they ever even mention the fact that Lois had a sibling in season 1? I don't know if they did. Maybe they did and I've forgotten it, and that's fair enough. But even the fact that they're talking about a sister, it kind of reminds me on like other shows. I mean, what's an example here that'll be close to this? So I think in The Flash, the idea that Joe, or the idea that Iris's mum had a son and she had a long lost brother that showed up out of nowhere, it was very soap opera, right? Like this, there's a whole family branch that we didn't know about that they conveniently just never mentioned before or something. And that's not maybe a one-to-one comparison, but it makes me feel like that, even though I know about Lucy, because I know from the comics, because the character was technically on Supergirl, although she was long forgotten about, so she might as well be new. It doesn't really matter anymore. It just all feels like it's thrust upon us. It's very weird. So I didn't feel anything through any of this except just like they're trying really hard to give us these dramatic scenes. And I think the other problem with it is that we've had Lois and Sam like have like better fights before about their relationship in ways that we saw how it was affecting them, and we saw it be this stumbling block when they were discussing certain things or trying to accomplish certain things in season 1. So when they eventually had the fight that sort of like almost ultimately convinced Sam to kind of step down and try and enjoy life a bit more and stuff like that, and just be a dad and so on and so on. Like, it felt like it came as a consequence to stuff we've been seeing, as opposed to this, which is just kind of like, okay, so they're fighting again, and they're fighting about something that is, to the audience, not being a thing, right? Yeah, they're talking about it as if it was this thing in their past. And, you know, Sam sees the cult lady, goes, oh, it's not this stuff again, is it? Well, that's great, but, like, we've not seen this, really. So, so I don't know. There's a big disconnect for me in that plot line. To go back to I was going to say the Doomsday stuff. It's not the Doomsday stuff anymore, it's the Bizarro stuff. But I should probably mention just, obviously Natalie's a little bit pissed that her dad's like helping out with super stuff. He gets his big moment when his suit comes on. But the key thing I want to bring up here, which really, it's a little thing, but it really bugged me, is... So John Henry goes down pretending to be like a investigator or something into the mines, and the evil lady from last time, the one who cheesily said at the end, he's more powerful than we ever imagined, right? She's showing him about and pretending to be nice, and she has another really cheesy like bad line where John Henry notices, wait, this wasn't like seismic or something, like this was someone detonated down here, someone intentionally blew this hole here. And she hits him in the back and goes, yes, it was I. That wasn't the exact line, but it may as well have been. It was I did or we did or something. But it may as well have been, it was I who blew up the mines. But what bugged me here, though, is that, I mean, that the line's bad, but that wasn't what bugged me. What bugged me is that it cut to the farm and like Sam's in the Winnebago, right? And he's at the computer that's like connected to John Henry, and Lois says, what's going on? And Sam says, oh, he's not moved in a bit, but he's probably just hit a roadblock. Okay, a bit optimistic, but that's fine. Okay, that's not a problem on its own. The problem I had is that like 5-10 minutes later, when everything was happening, and Superman like is saying something, so he's flying to the mines, is at this point, Sam starts yelling, you know, over the comms, like, you know, John Henry, can you hear me? And immediately the AI voice and the computer says, John Henry appears to be unconscious. And I'm like, you couldn't have said that like as soon as you get knocked out? Like he actively said in front of the computer, you know, he's not moved in a while. It felt so weird that all of us, like, the computer could just tell him that now. Like, very conveniently, it couldn't tell him that 10 minutes ago. That was, like, it was really stupid. It really bugged me. It really bugged. It's just, you know, just for convenience sake, it can't let him know that yet. So, like it'll just happen later. I guess he technically never asked, but he didn't ask this time. It's not like he asked for an update on John Henry. He didn't ask the computer for something. He was just yelling. So this scene shows that the computer AI can hear what's being requested or what's going on and decide that it's a good time to interject with information that might be valuable, that might be relevant to what's been said. So this scene proves that the computer can make that distinction and jump in and say, hey, this might be important, here's some information. So why didn't it do it 10 minutes ago? That bugged me. That really bugged me. Yeah, what else we got to talk about? The mayor stuff, I guess. This was a bit shit, if I'm honest. Like, I'm fine with Lana running for mayor. I kind of liked how we got here. Some of that stuff was pretty decent in the last couple of episodes. I think what bugged me about the plotline this episode is that the scene, we had like a very sort of contrived scene that was there to show the townsfolk won't trust her because she's given out bad loans in the past and because she was recruiting people for Morgan Edge last season. Maybe it's just because the guy that was saying all of this stuff wasn't that great an actor, and it just kind of all felt a bit clunky because of that. But it kind of felt like we had to do all this in one scene, so maybe it was just too truncated. But as a result, it felt really, just really, I don't know. I guess soap opera again is the best word I can think of to describe it. Where like she's only just started. We only just established last episode that she's going to run for mayor, and in this episode we get one scene of her like setting up some posters, and then immediately the next scene is here's a big hurdle, here's a big stumbling block that's going to make her doubt herself. It feels like, I don't know, it feels like maybe either we're too early for that plot beat or we're just rushing through that plot beat, because then ultimately it's just like, oh, Sarah gives us some advice and she's like, okay, I'll be myself and I'll do this live blog thing from my kitchen and show that I'm a working mom who makes marinara sauce or something. And that scene on its own was fine. There was nothing wrong with it, but yeah. So the stuff with them wasn't as good. It's funny because like my favorite plot point in this episode probably was part of the Jordan and Sarah story. Even though overall I still feel like the whole thing's been a bit of a hurdle to get through, and it's nice that it's over. It's nice that we can move on and hopefully do better things with them. But that kind of bugged me. Yeah, the swerve with Bizarro is fun enough. It was nice for, I think, fans who like know enough to kind of like guess that we're doing Doomsday, but we got the swerve. Even if it started to feel like, as it was getting close to it, that it was going to swerve us because it was just a bit too on the nose. That's okay. It's okay to be like sort of just go along for the ride and be surprised. So I'm okay with that part of it. There is one plot that I've not spoken about. Jordan being jealous of the other guy for clearly taking some sort of steroids, but it turns out that it's actually XK or kryptonite steroids, and that his girlfriend is the dealer. She's the one who's selling it to the athletes on the team. I don't. This is one of those things where, like, the more this plot went on this episode, and it was like, okay, he's getting into a fight with the guy. It was okay, maybe it's slightly interesting that it's kryptonite or XK related because it'll feed into plot later on, and it'll be like the fact that he knows so much about this will be good later, whatever. And they have the fight, and that ties into like Clark losing his cool at one point, and that's okay too. But the girlfriend turning out to be the dealer was like, oh god, what are you doing? What is this plot? Like, why are we doing this? And this girlfriend character hasn't really been a character. She's just been this girlfriend that Jordan's kind of had this season, like, for the most part, right? Like, there's not much to her. So when he goes to her at the end and he's like, hey, like, I know you're dealing, and she gives this sob story about helping her dad pay bills, and then Jordan, ends the scene with, or sorry, not Jordan, Jonathan ends the scene with, I need you to sell me some, because he wants an edge. I'm like, really? We're going to do, Jonathan is going to take crypto steroids because he's feeling insecure about being an athlete? I'll put it this way, like most high school shows that try to do an addiction or a drug storyline, they tend to fall a bit flat by and large for me. They tend to be a little too surface level, and they all just come off a little glorified TV, I guess. But I think especially in this case where I just like, it's one of those things where you see the plot, right? So if the plot's a vehicle, right? Let's use the Winnebago. The plot's a Winnebago, and it's going down the highway, and this is where we're meant to be going. We've got a destination in mind, but you can just, like, every so often, like with a plot like this, you can sense, like, wait, are the wheels starting to turn to go down that off ramp? Are we going down a detour here? And you don't want to go down the detour. Like, you're going straight to Disneyland, and like the driver at the wheel for some reason has seen a sign saying there's a ball of yarn that's worth seeing, and he's turning the vehicle, and you're like, no, don't. Let's go where we want to go. Damn it! Like every every step in this journey is important, and you're going to like take us off road to gawk at some pointless gimmicky bullshit. Like, what are you doing? Like that's how I feel with this sort of plot, where it gets to the end of this scene in particular, and I'm like, oh, we have to sit through more of this. We have to go through. So we've wrapped up the Jordan Sarah plot that I didn't like, and they're happy now. He's given her a necklace that his grandmother gave to his grandfather, or vice versa rather. But you know what I mean. But then we're doing this with Jonathan, and I am concerned. And it's a shame because Jonathan's stuff with the other characters in the episode I actually quite like. I like his stuff with Clark this episode. I liked his stuff with Jordan and telling him to go see Sarah, even though he had his own shit going on. I liked his stuff with Natalie this episode. He's very charismatic and has good chemistry with everyone else in the cast, except his girlfriend a little bit. Which didn't bother me at first because it's just like, this is just to be like, Jonathan's got a girlfriend, so that we don't have to explain, or we don't have to have him be moody that he's alone and stuff. Like, he has a girlfriend. Like, she doesn't have to be a prominent character necessarily. We just don't want to, like, that's not part of the character story this season, is that he's going to be lonely and moody about it. So, he has a girlfriend that we occasionally see him hug goodbye, and that's fine. Like, whatever. But instead, no, we have this plot now, and I'm dreading it. I'm dreading it. So, there's episode 3 of season 2 of Lois, not Lois and Clark, Superman and Lois. Oof. Do I wish I was watching Lois and Clark? Maybe a little bit. I do love Lois and Clark. You know, the Dean Cain being a shithead notwithstanding, like, Lois and Clark has a lot of nostalgia for me. But hey, I did like the joke actually when Lois was nervous when she thought she was going to see Lucy again for the first time in a long time. She said something to the effect of, "I know I wear this leather jacket all the time, but I feel like I'm in a biker gang." that was a funny line. I thought that was a cute little line to show that she was nervous. It made me laugh. So yeah, a mixed bag. I'd say overall again. There's some good things. There's some bad things. Unfortunately, comparing it to the first season makes it come up looking a little rough because season 1 generally veered toward the positive rather than negative, even if there was little things here or there. This feels a bit more 50-50, honestly, right now. So I'm hoping that we keep veering, back onto the highway, back onto that highway with the destination in mind, and not, I don't know, second best chicken wings in, X state. Or whatever stupid things you see road signs for when you're traveling. I don't know. Like, I've never done a road trip in the US. I don't know. I'm just using bullshit things from movies here to make my point. Anyway, that has been my thoughts on Lois. I just did it again. That has been my thoughts on Superman and Lois season 2 episode 3. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. And of course, you can support everything we do over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?